Mama Ifioma sat in her small room in Abuja, holding her chest as sharp pains spread through her body. She was 63, frail, and struggling to breathe, but all she wanted was for her only son Chike to take her to the hospital. She called out to him again and again, pleading softly, hoping he would hear the desperation in her voice. Chike, however, was lost in his own world. He had recently fallen in love with a new girlfriend, and was more concerned about showing off to her than caring for his mother. When she begged him to drive her to the hospital, he shook his head and said he was too busy. He dismissed her with cold words, embarrassed by her weakness and unwilling to give her even a moment of his time. Tears rolled down Mama Ifioma's cheeks as she realized she could no longer wait for him. Gathering the little strength she had left, she walked slowly out of the house and waved down a taxi. Clutching her chest, she whispered the hospital's name to the driver, but halfway there her body gave way. The kind driver, shocked and worried, rushed her to the emergency ward himself and quickly called Chike. Hours later, Chike arrived at the hospital, his face showing annoyance rather than concern. But by then it was already too late. Dr. Adebayo met him at the door and spoke words that would cut deep into his heart. He told Chike that his mother had begged for help, but her son had ignored her cries. Chike's body trembled as guilt hit him, but the pain became unbearable when a nurse handed him a letter Mama Ifioma had left behind. With shaking hands, he opened it and read her final words. She wrote that her estate, land, and savings had been transferred to her orphan niece Adora, the young woman who had always cared for her when Chike turned away. At the funeral, family members and neighbors whispered about Chike's neglect. They praised Adora for her kindness and faithfulness, while Chike stood in shame. He tried later to contest the will, but the world had already seen the truth. Recordings of his mother begging for his help surfaced, leaving him powerless. The story spread like wildfire, and Chike became the example of a son who failed his own mother. Meanwhile, Adora honored Mama Ifioma's memory by opening a hospital wing in her name. Chike stood outside the building, tears streaming down his face, knowing his regret had come too late. Chike looked at his mother with irritation, embarrassed by the way she held her chest and begged him for help. Mama Ifioma's voice trembled as she pleaded to be taken to the hospital, but Chike brushed her off, saying he was too busy. His mind was filled with thoughts of his new girlfriend, the woman he wanted to impress, and he saw his mother as a burden that slowed him down. Instead of kindness, he offered her cold words, telling her to stop disturbing him with her complaints. The old woman's eyes filled with tears, but her son turned away, laughing on the phone with his girlfriend as though nothing serious was happening. She sat in silence, her body weak and her spirit broken, while Chike continued with his day, not even looking back at her. Her chest tightened, and she whispered his name again, but he dismissed her with a wave of his hand, saying he had no time for her. The sound of his laughter mixed with her quiet sobs, and it became clear that his love for his mother had been replaced by pride and selfishness. She lowered her head, knowing she could not force him to care. The pain grew stronger, and she realized she would have to find her own way. She slowly stood up, her steps unsteady, and made her way toward the door while Chike scrolled through his phone. He did not notice the struggle in her movement, nor the way she leaned against the wall for support. All he cared about was his girlfriend's next call, ignoring the woman who had given him life. Mama Ifioma walked outside, weak but determined. She raised her hand and waved down a taxi. Her son's harsh refusal echoed in her mind, each word cutting deeper than the pain in her chest. As the taxi drove away, Chike was still inside the house, smiling into his phone, telling his girlfriend how much he adored her. He did not know that his choice at that moment would change his life forever. What he thought was a simple dismissal would soon return to haunt him, because the world does not forget the cries of a mother ignored by her own child. Mama Ifioma held her chest tightly as she dragged herself out of the house. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she refused to give up. Standing by the roadside, she waved weakly until a taxi stopped. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, quickly stepped out to help her into the back seat. She sank into the chair, her breathing shallow, whispering the name of the hospital. Sweat ran down her forehead as the pain in her chest grew sharper, and she leaned against the seat, praying silently for strength to reach her destination. The driver glanced at her through the mirror, worried by the way she clutched her chest. He tried to comfort her, telling her to hold on, that they would arrive soon. Mama Ifioma nodded faintly, her lips trembling as she whispered her son's name, hoping he would somehow change his mind and come for her. But she knew deep inside that she was alone in this battle. The city of Abuja moved quickly outside the window, but inside the taxi, time felt slow, every second stretching as her body weakened. Halfway through the ride, her strength gave way. Her hands slipped from her chest, and her body slumped to the side. The driver panicked, calling out to her, but she could not answer. He pressed harder on the accelerator, his heart racing, determined to save her life. He shouted for people to make way as he sped through traffic, praying she would hold on just a little longer. When they reached the hospital gate, he rushed out, calling for help. Nurses and orderlies came running, pulling her limp body from the car and placing her on a stretcher. The driver's hands shook as he explained what had happened, begging them to act fast. Doctors surrounded her, pushing the stretcher inside while the driver dialed the only number she had whispered earlier, her son's. His voice trembled as he explained that his mother was fighting for her life. But as Mama Ifeoma was wheeled away, the truth remained clear. She had taken her lonely ride to the hospital, without the support of the son she loved the most. The moment that should have shown her family's care had instead revealed her deepest pain. The ride that began with fragile hope ended in collapse, leaving her fate hanging between life and death. The kind driver's heart raced as he watched Mama Ifeoma grow weaker in the back seat. Without wasting time, he drove straight to the hospital, shouting for help as soon as he arrived. Nurses rushed out with a stretcher, and together they carried her inside. He followed closely, explaining to the doctors that she had collapsed midway in his car. The driver, though a stranger, treated her like his own mother. While she was taken into the emergency ward, he searched her small handbag for any number to call. There he found a phone with one name saved clearly: Chike. He dialed it quickly, hoping the son would rush to her side. When Chike answered, his voice was cold. The driver spoke with urgency, telling him that his mother was fighting for her life in the hospital. Instead of running to her, Chike sighed in annoyance, saying he was busy. The driver begged him to come, reminding him that a mother's life could not be replaced. After hesitation, Chike finally agreed but said he would be late. Hours passed, and Mama Ifeoma lay surrounded by doctors, while the driver sat outside, waiting, praying for her recovery. Finally, Chike appeared, walking slowly into the hospital as though it were an inconvenience. His face carried no worry, only irritation at being called away from his girlfriend. He glanced at the driver and asked carelessly what had happened. The driver looked at him with disbelief, wondering how a son could be so indifferent when his mother was at death's door. The hospital corridor buzzed with activity, but Chike's lack of emotion made him stand out. Inside the ward, Mama Ifeoma's condition remained critical. The nurses whispered about how she had arrived with no family, only a stranger who cared enough to save her. They shook their heads at the thought of her son arriving hours later without any urgency. The driver watched quietly, feeling more protective of her than the man who should have been by her side. That night, as Chike finally sat down, the truth was clear. His mother had been saved by the kindness of a stranger, while her own blood had abandoned her. The call that was supposed to bring comfort had instead revealed his heartlessness. The delay was more than just hours. It was the distance between a mother's love and a son's neglect. Dr. Adebayo stepped out of the emergency ward with a heavy expression on his face. Chike, who had just arrived, stood up quickly, expecting to hear that his mother was fine. But the doctor's words were sharp and carried the weight of truth. He looked straight into Chike's eyes and said, "You're already too late. She begged for care, but you ignored her." The words cut through the air like a knife, and the corridor fell silent. Nurses nearby paused, their eyes fixed on the son who had failed his own mother. Chike's face dropped as the reality hit him. His heart began to pound, but he struggled to hide his guilt. He stammered, trying to explain that he was busy, that he didn't know it was this serious. But Dr. Adebayo did not soften his voice. He told him that Mama Ifeoma had arrived unconscious, and they had done everything they could, but her body was too weak from the delay. He reminded Chike that if she had been brought in earlier, her chances might have been different. The words kept echoing in Chike's head. Too late. Ignored her. Begged for care. He remembered the moment she had pleaded with him at home, the way she had called his name while holding her chest. Instead of helping, he had pushed her away, choosing to spend his time with his girlfriend. Now he stood in a hospital corridor, hearing from a stranger that his mother had fought alone until her last breath. Tears welled up in his eyes, but they brought no comfort. The doctor shook his head and walked away, leaving Chaik to face the whispers of nurses and patients who had overheard everything. People looked at him with disappointment, some even with anger, as if they too carried his mother's pain. The silence in that moment was heavier than any words he could have spoken. Chaik leaned against the wall, his legs weak, his mind replaying his harsh refusal again and again. The image of his mother leaving in that taxi haunted him now. She had gone alone, while her son, the one she trusted most, had turned his back. The doctor's words became the truth the world would remember. A mother begged, a son ignored, and regret came too late. Chaik broke down the moment the nurse placed a folded envelope in his hands. His mother's name was written across it in shaky handwriting, and just seeing it made his chest tighten. His tears blurred the words, and he struggled to breathe as he opened it slowly. Inside was his mother's last letter, written with love but filled with the kind of truth that crushed his spirit. She thanked him for being her son, but she also wrote of her pain, her loneliness, and how she had begged for his care. She said she had prayed for him to change, but when he turned away, she found comfort in the kindness of another, her orphan niece, Ayanda. Chaik's hands trembled as he read further. The letter revealed something he never expected. Mama Ayanda had been hiding a great inheritance, a vast estate, lands, and savings that she had quietly managed for years. But she wrote clearly that it would not go to him. She had already transferred everything to Ayanda, the young woman who had stood by her side when no one else would. She explained that true love was shown through actions, not words, and Ayanda had given her care, respect, and warmth when her own son could not. The words pierced through Chaik's heart like fire. He fell to his knees, clutching the letter to his chest, crying out for forgiveness. His cries echoed through the hospital corridor, but they could not change what was already done. The same woman he had ignored in her final moments had been the one who still thought of him even in disappointment. She had chosen to teach him a lesson that the world would never let him forget. He saw flashes of all the times she had called his name, the way she had begged for a ride, the look in her eyes when he dismissed her. Now those moments returned to him, sharper than any blade, reminding him of the love he had wasted. His mother had given everything, and in the end, she gave her inheritance to someone who truly valued her. Chaik wept loudly, his body shaking with bitter regret. The letter in his hands was more than just paper. It was the voice of his mother speaking beyond the grave, reminding him that neglect has consequences and that love, once lost, cannot be reclaimed. The letter shook Chaik to his core as he read the shocking truth. His mother had not left her wealth, land, and savings to him, her only son, but to Ayanda, her orphan niece. The words were written so clearly that there was no room for doubt. Mama Ayanda had explained that love was not measured by blood alone, but by kindness, sacrifice, and care. She wrote that Ayanda had shown her compassion in her weakest days, sitting by her side, cooking for her, listening to her stories, and treating her with dignity when others turned away. Chaik, who should have been her greatest comfort, had given her only shame and neglect. Chaik's eyes burned as the reality sank in. His mother had owned more than he ever imagined. Properties in Abuja, large pieces of land in the village, and accounts filled with savings. All of it was now under Ayanda's name. She had secured it legally before her final days, making sure that the one who had truly valued her would inherit everything. The thought crushed Chaik's pride. He had spent his life believing he was entitled to her fortune, yet his arrogance had blinded him from seeing that his actions would one day cost him everything. Ayanda was called to the hospital, and when she arrived, she held the letter in her hands with tears rolling down her cheeks. Unlike Chaik, she did not see it as wealth to enjoy but as a responsibility to honor her late aunt. She whispered softly, promising Mama Ayanda that she would use the inheritance wisely and keep her memory alive. Everyone who stood nearby could see the difference between her humility and Chaik's bitterness. Whispers began to spread among family members and neighbors. They spoke about how the old woman had given her heart to her niece, rewarding her faithfulness with blessings that would last a lifetime. Chaik's shame grew heavier as he listened, realizing he had lost not just an inheritance, but his place in his mother's heart. The twist was more than financial, it was a lesson. A mother had chosen gratitude over bloodline, love over entitlement, and care over empty words. Chike's face crumbled under the weight of the truth, while Adora's name rose with honor. The shocking twist was now the story that everyone would remember. The fortune of a lifetime given not to a son who neglected, but to a niece who loved without expecting anything in return. At the funeral, the church was filled with family, neighbors, and friends who had come to honor Mama Ifeoma's life. Her coffin lay at the front, surrounded by flowers, but the atmosphere carried more than grief. People began whispering about what had really happened in her last days. They spoke about how she had begged her son to take her to the hospital, how he had turned his back, and how a stranger had been the one to save her. Their voices carried a mix of sadness and disappointment, and though no one shouted, the truth spread quickly from one person to another. Chike sat in the front row, but instead of respect, all eyes on him were filled with judgment. The shame weighed on his shoulders as he heard his name spoken in hushed tones. Mothers leaned to their children, warning them never to treat their parents the way he had. Elders shook their heads, saying that neglect had cost him not only his mother's love, but also her blessings. Each whisper felt like a knife cutting into his pride, and yet he could not silence them. On the other side sat Adora, her eyes red with tears, but her presence was different. People looked at her with admiration, praising the way she had cared for her aunt. Neighbors remembered how she often visited, how she carried food, washed clothes, and kept Mama Ifeoma company. They said she deserved the inheritance, for she had given her heart freely without expecting anything in return. Family members embraced her, thanking her for standing by their sister when her own son failed. The priest, during his sermon, did not call out Chike by name, but his words were clear. He spoke about honoring parents, about the blessings that come from care, and the curses that follow neglect. He reminded everyone that wealth could vanish, but the memory of how you treated those who raised you would last forever. The entire church nodded in agreement, their eyes once again falling on the son who had chosen selfishness over love. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, Adora's hands trembled as she threw in a handful of soil. People gathered around her, offering comfort and calling her the true daughter of the family. Chike stood apart, silent, his tears mixing with regret. The public lesson was clear for all. Love and care speak louder than blood, and respect for parents is a legacy greater than riches. The final blow came when Chike, desperate and ashamed, decided to contest the will. He could not accept that all his mother's wealth had been given to Adora, and he hired lawyers to argue that he was her only son and rightful heir. He walked into the courtroom with false confidence, hoping to twist the story and win sympathy. But the truth was stronger than any argument he could make. As the hearing began, evidence was presented, recordings from neighbors, friends, and even the taxi driver who had carried Mama Ifeoma to the hospital. The room fell silent as a recording of her weak voice played. She was begging her son to take her to the hospital, crying out his name with pain and desperation. Her voice trembled through the speakers, and every word was like fire against Chike's claim. Then another recording followed, her telling the driver about her son's refusal, her disappointment, her loneliness. The courtroom shook with emotion, and many people wiped tears from their eyes. Even the judge paused, clearly moved by the sound of a mother abandoned by her child. Chike sat frozen in his seat, his face pale, his head lowered as the evidence piled against him. Witness after witness testified that Mama Ifeoma had been ignored by the very son now fighting for her property. Neighbors spoke about seeing Adora by her side day and night, caring for her like a daughter, while Chike was nowhere to be found. Each word destroyed his case, stripping away the last pieces of pride he had left. When the judge finally spoke, the ruling was clear. The will was valid, and all of Mama Ifeoma's estate belonged to Adora. The recordings had revealed not only cruelty, but the reason his mother had made her decision. Chike had lost everything, not only the inheritance but also the respect of his community. He walked out of the court with cameras flashing, the whispers of shame following him like shadows. For Adora, the moment was bittersweet. She did not celebrate the wealth, but she held the will close, promising to use it as her aunt had wished. For Chike, it was the final blow, the undeniable truth that his mother's love could not be bought back, and that the world now saw him not as a son, but as the man who ignored the cries of the woman who gave him life. The last scene showed Adora standing proudly at the front of a new hospital wing. The walls were freshly painted, and a large banner carried the name, Mama Ifeoma Memorial Wing. Doctors, nurses, and members of the community clapped as Adora cut the ribbon with tears in her eyes. She spoke softly into the microphone, her voice breaking as she dedicated the building to the woman who had raised her with love and taught her the meaning of kindness. She said her aunt deserved to be remembered not only as a mother, but as a blessing to many lives. Her words touched everyone, and people nodded with respect, proud that her inheritance was being used for good. Inside, photographs of Mama Ifeoma decorated the entrance, showing her smiling in her younger years. Patients and visitors stopped to look, whispering prayers for the woman whose name now stood as a symbol of hope. Nurses explained that the wing would help the sick and the poor, giving them the care that Mama Ifeoma had once begged for. The atmosphere was filled with gratitude, and Adaora's face shone with humility as she promised to continue her aunt's legacy. But outside the gates, Chike stood alone. His clothes were neat, but his face was stained with tears. He watched through the glass as people celebrated Adora, while he remained a shadow in the background. His shoulders shook as he cried, remembering every moment he had turned his mother away. The sound of clapping inside the hospital cut through his heart, reminding him that he could have been part of this honor, if only he had chosen love over pride. Children passing by whispered to their parents about the man crying outside, and elders shook their heads, saying, "That is the son who ignored his mother." His regret was now public, his pain laid bare for everyone to see. No amount of wealth or excuses could erase the truth that the world had witnessed. As Adora walked through the new ward with doctors by her side, she carried her aunt's memory like a crown. Chike, unable to enter, sank to his knees by the gate, weeping loudly. The story spread quickly online, videos of the dedication mixing with images of him crying outside. The viral ending was clear: a mother's love honored by the one who cared, and a son left broken, paying the price of neglect with endless regret. Hey loves red heart, thank you for staying with me till the end. Glowing star, don't forget to hit that like button, thumbs up. Drop your thoughts in the comments, speech balloon. And subscribe bell so you never miss another story. See you next time, 2 hearts.